Howdy, y'all. Welcome. I wanted to talk a bit more about how compasses and circles are used in traditional witchcraft. Go into a bit more in depth on how they're compared and contrasted. I'll be using my friend Ian's book, The Witch Compass, to sort of delve into some understandings. I'll be quoting from that. And I'll sort of be exploring my own experience and sort of what I've come into contact with to sort of give a bigger picture. So let's talk about magic circles and start there, since that is what most people are familiar with. Within the context of my practice and our coven and the way that I instruct my apprentice, we typically use the circle as a vessel to brew magic in, and a lens to sort of gather and bend certain spiritual powers in particular ways, to sort of condense them in and use them in particular manners. It can also be used, there's a lot of cosmological mapping with the circle as well as the compass. But I really think of the circle as the encircled crossroads. There's often this phrase that the circle is between the worlds. You see in a lot of magic. It's a liminal space. And we use it to call spirits into that liminal space, that in-betweenness, that almost straddles the hedge in a way. The magic circle, at least in Western ceremonial magic, primarily is used because of its protective quality. That goes all the way back to the Sumerian Zishuru, the sacred enclosure, or the temenos, in sort of ancient Greek conceptualizations of a place that sort of enclosed and set aside for the spirits. The magic circle is very much that, and there's different ways of using magic circles. I often joke that it's a basket that I can use to carry magical powers to certain places, to sort of gather them all in one and then use them for something. I think of the circle as very utilitarian, but we don't always cast a circle for our magic. And sort of built into that framework of the circle, the magic circle as a protective structure, is the idea of guardianship. That the sorcerer, the magician that sort of takes responsibility for the liminal space, acts as a guardian and a receiver of the power that's mediated between the other world and the living, waking world. Guardianship not so much as like being a watchman at the edge looking to skewer anything that trespasses, but sort of being responsible for the exchange of power between worlds. And one of the things that Chambers reminds us of in his book, The Witch Compass, is that the compass contains circles, or can contain a magic circle, but the magic circle does not contain the compass. The witch compass is sort of a bigger conceptual framework than the magic circle is. Both of these magic tools have sort of built into them cosmological mapping, where each direction is associated with particular qualities or spirits or powers. Typically they're elemental in nature, especially in the Western tradition, and different traditions map the elements in different directions. In our coven, we typically work with air in the north, fire in the east, earth in the south, water in the west. But we also work with above and below as conceptual frameworks, and the center. So to summarize, primarily, we would use the circle to bring spirits in to sort of collect and condense magical power, or to make a pact with a spirit. And it's all about meeting with the spirits sort of in the interstices of creation and mediating that back into our living lives. It's very much, because of that elemental quality, at least as I understand it as a witch, that is very much about the manifestation of one's material resources. And there's definitely a level of necromancy involved with the elements. I definitely think of the elemental round as coming from the underworld, as coming from interaction with beings that we might call the dead collectively. Now let's consider the compass, which is, as I said earlier, a bigger framework. In my tradition, or at least in our coven, we use a compass, and it's made of 3 magic circles that are sort of bound together to do specific actions. And going back to Ian Chambers' The Witch Compass, he kind of gives us a little key, a little thing that comes from Robert Cochrane in one of his letters, I believe, to Norman Giles. And that is the number 1734 as sort of a numeric mystery. Ian says one way to look at that number, which is also not just a concept in traditional witchcraft, but also the name of a whole tradition or methodology of witchcraft, 1734. But in his book, The Witch Compass, Ian says we could look at 1734 as, the one is the compass itself, this one tool that has 7 points. So sort of, the 4 directions above, below, and center. And then it spans 3 worlds, the underworld, the overworld, and the here and now world. And then it reaches out to the 4 directions of creation, 1734. And, all of those are really important numbers in traditional witchery, especially regarding the compass round. So, whereas the circle was mostly an encircled crossroads where spirits are brought into it to sort of contain and lens magic, the compass moves. It's always turning. It's always in motion. It's a vehicle. It's a chariot. I call it the witch's chariot. It is a portal or a doorway into the other worlds. It can be used as a lens to sort of gather and coalesce and direct energy in certain ways. It's a wheel in that we can layer and map the wheel of the year to the compass round and sort of walk it. And it's also not just a map, but the journey itself and the destination that we're going to. The compass can become other worlds. A world in some ways can be considered just a state of consciousness. And when you change your state of consciousness, your whole way of perceiving reality, you're changing the world that you're in. That's one way of accessing sort of the underworld and the overworld, is by changing the state of consciousness that you're in. The underworld is encountered every night in almost every human being, because when we dream, we're experiencing the underworld. And some of us, people that we call witches, who can don the second skin and sort of escape the singular body perspective, can experience a fuller sense of other worlds by exiting and going deeper and out and through the personal underworld that we dream of. In his book, The Witch Compass, Ian Chambers writes, "The witch compass is essentially a method of mapping, journeying, and envisioning the otherworld, underworld, or unspirited realm. Often incorporating the physical landscape to trigger certain symbolic, mythic, or allegorical experiences, the compass is a platform for projecting the awareness of the witch to engage in spiritual congress. A ritual utilizing the compass might incorporate within it a plethora of smaller rituals and meditational devices intended to effect the transition required to approach the otherworld, while the result can be employed for mystical, magical, or divinatory purposes." The compass can become other worlds. We sometimes call it the 4-cornered castle 4 times revolving. One way of using the compass that's very common is that you use it to travel to what some people call foreign lands, and that allows you to have access to the magic of those realms. The 4 directions are associated with castles or kingdoms or courts of spirit. Elsewhere in The Witch Compass, Chambers writes, "Within the context of the witch compass, however, the intention is to entice, court, and attract the spirit of the compass to attend and uphold the construct of the cosmological and mythical landscape the sorcerer is accessing through the ensorcelled ring. It is to be understood, then, that the ensorcelled witch compass is constructed with several purposes in mind. In the first instance, we draw in the spirits of the airs, calling them to the fascination of the ring, where their attendance enforces the 4 and 8 regions of the horizon and holds the heavens and the earthly realms between them. Alternatively, the spirits of the particular air that we intend working with can be ensorcelled into the ring to imbue the enclosure with the quintessence of that mythic landscape, transporting us to a specific land in order to have access to the magics available there. In the Witch Compass, we have a very simple sort of explanation, sort of associating each of the directions with its virtue, and he sort of gives a very simple map that the north is about magic and sorcery and initiation, the east is with prosperity and growth, south is for healing, and the west is for divination and communication with the dead and the spirit world in general. Because the compass is seen as a portal to the other world, its boundary, its circumference, as seen as the passage into this center, which is entering into the other world. The compass is sort of inside out, in that the interior of the compass is outside of the hedge. And when you go into the compass, you're actually exiting into the outside, the other world itself, that the living, waking world is sort of a small part of. You can sort of think of the living, waking world as civilization, what's inside the hedge, and the other world is the wild, what is outside the hedge. And that place inside the compass is often talked about as not between the worlds, but as the world within all worlds. It is the inside of creation. And from that place, we can access all the worlds. So the compass sort of moves between them. And you can think of that boundary that I talked about as being the place where every possibility becomes open to us as we cross over into the other. And we can bring those limitless possibilities back with us into the waking world to sort of alchemize those new realities. One way in particular that we often use and work the compass is by walking that edge. Sometimes it's referred to as the river of moonlight or starlight. There's a deep connection between the mote of the compass and the moon. Inside the mote, we often talk about it as being the blood acre, the place where the witch blood sort of bubbles up and we interact and ride together to form the witch fire. And so one of the main tools of the compass that's closely associated with it is the stang, which is, the framework upon which a compass is built is the stang itself. It is the scaffolding that moves the inside of the compass around. And it is almost like a stick that stirs the cauldron in some ways, or a steering device that moves the compass. So one thing that you can do, besides walking the edge, the river of time, the river of moonlight, to sort of tread back into places where you can access the past or the future, to sort of access those possibilities. But you can also take the stang and move the compass to one of the worlds or kingdoms at the 4 directions or the 8 directions, depending on your tradition or the way you work it. And then you can take that stang, and because the stang contains, at least usually, it contains an iron nail in its base, often a horseshoe nail, because the stang is shod like a horse, like it's a steed that can carry you between the worlds. And that stang, that iron piece in it, that magic key, can be possessed and used to sort of pull energy out of different realms or kingdoms into the compass and then brought back to this world. You can take that stang, and it's typically not moved after you've set the compass, except for intentionally. So you can possess that stang as a coven in and out of the direction. Often people will make a lemniscate or a infinity symbol marching in and out of the direction, because unlike the magic circle, which is typically not transgressed at its boundary, the compass is meant to be moved in and out of. When you first come into a compass, you cross the bridge into it, which is an intentional act of penetrating it. And then you can take the stang and move it in and out of the edge where you want to pull that virtue from. So say you're working with the East because you want to pull in prosperity and growth and newness, like, it's associated with the rising sun and the powers of fire and the powers of blood and awakening. And so you can process the stang in and out of the Eastern kingdom, out of the Eastern castle, which is like a doorway into that world, and pull those powers of prosperity and vitality and newness and the power of dawn into the compass, and then bring that back here to sort of get a spell to grow something, to draw in prosperity energies and powers. You can also associate talismanic objects with each of the compass points. And those objects, like say when you use them to lay the compass and to sort of anchor them in this world. And then that object can be carried with you, especially if you have like a particular stone that maybe is associated with the south. It can be used as a healing amulet or talismanic object to bring that power from the compass in. We often also use our cords, our initiation cords, and each of the knots of the cord is tied a wind of the direction, a wind of what we call the airts. And those knots can be undone to release that power. And then often it's advised that you rebind that wind into your cord so that you don't become unbalanced, because in some ways the witch's initiation cord is the body of the initiate itself. And each tradition has its own mapping with each of the directions on what specific textures and resonances of its virtues that it sort of layers there. There are so many associations with each of the directions that are layered because everything, all of the conceptual lore and framework of a tradition can be hung on a compass round. That it sort of embodies the entire cosmology of a tradition. This mapping is both internal and external to the compass. We internalize the compass into ourselves. The internalized compass guides us and orients us in our daily lives. But the external compass, the one that we work with as a magical tool to bilocate into other worlds, it has this really cool feature being a non-hierarchical spirit taxonomy. That each of the directions is associated with a kingdom of spirits or a court of spirits. The word court etymologically comes from the word for four. And these four spirit courts, often referred to by a color system, red, white, green, or glass, or gray, and black, they are associated with the directions as well. And that means that these spirits interact with each other within the compass round. The compass round is a place where all the spirits meet and mingle. And that brews the fire that we use to empower our magic. And it's then hierarchical. No spirit from any particular direction is over any other particular spirit in this system. The interaction of beings and spiritual powers is integral to how the spirits work with one another. That there is no purity at all in witchcraft. That everything is contagious and interacts with one another. So whereas in a magic circle, I might do a spell and call in certain powers to help me perform that spell, in a compass round, I'm working with particular spirits of the direction that I'm headed to sort of go and retrieve the virtues of those directions, of those castles or kingdoms or realms or courts, depending on your tradition. You're going to be talked about in different ways. And then we pull them in, and in some ways we're sort of A compass is a lot more work. We're more active inside of it, and we're moving around a whole lot inside of a compass typically, because when we walk the edge, we're treading it and moving it and turning it in specific ways. When we're processing the stang around, we're directing it to move into particular worlds and back out of them, so that we can pull those possibilities from those worlds that aren't here into our waking world to make them come alive. The 8 directions are associated on the compass with the wheel of the year. The cardinal directions are associated with the seasonal feasts, the equinoxes and the solstices. And then the cross-quartered days, the northeast, southeast, northwest, southwest directions, are associated with the witch festivals, which are Candlemas, Roodmas, Lammas, and Hallowmas. You can also employ the cord, as I've said before. Each of those knots in the cord is associated with one of the witch festivals or the seasonal feasts, which are bound up with the powers of the winds themselves. And the cord can be used to access the powers and the virtues of those markings on the wheel of the year. If you want to access the power of Hallowmas in a different time of year, you go to that knot on your cord and you unbind it and you claim that virtue, that magic that's stored there for yourself. So to summarize that, the compass is essentially a vehicle or a wheel or a portal to the other world that allows the witch to go to these other worlds, these other possibilities, and unravel them into her own reality, using the stang, almost like a shuttle on a loom. That's another image that's I'm very fond of for the compass, is that it's this great machinery that reweaves reality for us, and the stang almost acts like a shuttle to move the threads about. So I hope you all enjoyed that, and you sort of get a better, fuller understanding of the differences and the comparisons between these two procedures and tools that are used by witches. Well met, and I wish you good luck.